the warrior who would not fight, who we are according to the Bhagavad Gita. Two armies face each other on the plain of Kurukshetra. Between them stands a chariot. In the chariot stands a warrior named Arjuna, one of the greatest fighters of his age, who has just looked across at the opposing army and seen his teachers, his cousins, his friends, his family, and dropped his bow. He cannot fight, he will not fight. And his charioteer, who is also a god, tells him why he must, and in telling him why, delivers one of the most compressed, most argued over, most practically charged philosophical texts ever written. The Bhagavad Gita is not a text about war. It is a text about what you do when you know what the right thing to do is and find that you cannot bring yourself to do it. The Bhagavad Gita, the Song of God, or the Song of the Lord, is embedded in the middle of the Mahabharata, the vast Sanskrit epic that is the longest poem in world literature, 7 times the length of the Iliad and the Odyssey combined. The Mahabharata tells the story of a dynastic war between 2 branches of the same royal family, the Pandavas and the Kauravas, for the kingdom of Hastinapura, a war that involves every major kingdom of the ancient Indian world and that ends in the near total destruction of the warrior class. It is, among other things, a meditation on the nature of dharma, duty, right conduct, cosmic order, and on what happens when the claims of different dharmas come into conflict with each other in ways that no simple rule can resolve. The Bhagavad Gita takes place on the eve of the war's first battle, and its dramatic situation, 2 armies facing each other, a warrior standing between them, a god about to deliver a philosophical teaching, is one of the most charged openings in world literature. Arjuna is not a coward. He has fought in wars before and will fight again. What has stopped him is not fear, but something more philosophically interesting, the recognition that the opposing army contains people he loves, people who taught him, people to whom he owes the specific obligations of relationship and kinship that the Dharmic tradition has always placed among the highest. He can see the justice of his cause. The Kauravas have wronged the Pandavas. The war is legitimate, but he cannot see how the justice of the cause justifies the specific violence of killing his own kin. He puts down his bow. He tells Krishna, his charioteer and his friend, and, as the Gita slowly reveals, the Supreme Being in human form, that he would rather be killed unarmed than kill his teachers and his kinsmen. He sits in the chariot and he weeps. And Krishna begins to speak. Who is Krishna? The question of who Krishna is in the Bhagavad Gita is one of the most important and most contested questions in Indian philosophical and theological history, and it must be addressed early because the answer organizes everything the Gita says. At one level, Krishna is the charioteer, Arjuna's companion and advisor, a prince of the Yadava clan, a figure of the Hindu devotional tradition whose earthly life is described in the Bhagavad Purana with a richness and a warmth that has made him one of the most beloved figures in any religious tradition. The child who steals butter, the youth who plays the flute and dances with the cowherd women, the advisor who guides the Pandavas through the catastrophic war. These are the dimensions of the Krishna who is present throughout the Mahabharata as a human being among human beings. At another level, Krishna is the Supreme Being, Vishnu incarnated in human form, the ultimate reality taking personal shape, the Brahman of the Upanishads condescending to speak in the language of relationship and love, rather than the language of abstract identity. When the Gita reaches its philosophical climax in the 11th chapter, and Arjuna asks to see Krishna's true form, what he sees, briefly, overwhelmingly, before he asks Krishna to return to the human form he can bear, is the universe itself, all creation contained in a single figure, all of time and all of space and all of existence, gathered into a vision that terrifies as much as it illuminates. This double identity, the human charioteer and the cosmic deity, the friend in the infinite, the voice of relationship and the voice of the ultimate, is not a confusion in the Gita's theology. It is the Gita's central claim that the personal and the universal are not opposed, that the God who is the ground of all being is also the God who sits beside you in the chariot and asks you why you have put down your bow. The ultimate reality is not reached by transcending the personal and the relational. It is encountered within them, through them, as their deepest ground. The philosophical tradition that the Gita generated, and the Gita has generated more philosophical commentary than perhaps any other text in the Indian tradition, the commentaries of Shankara and Ramanuja and Madhva, forming three distinct philosophical schools that have been in conversation and debate ever since, is structured precisely around the question of how to hold these two dimensions of Krishna together, as the impersonal absolute of the Upanishadic tradition, or as the personal God of the devotional tradition, or as some relationship between the two that neither reduces one to the other nor keeps them simply separate. The problem: Dharma in conflict. Arjuna's crisis is the crisis of Dharma in conflict, and it is a crisis that the Western philosophical tradition has often addressed under different names: the conflict of moral obligations, the limits of consequentialist reasoning, the problem of dirty hands in political life, without arriving at a resolution more satisfying than the Gita provides. Arjuna has multiple dharmas, multiple legitimate obligations that are now in direct conflict. As a warrior, his varna, his social role, and cosmic function, he has the dharma to fight when the cause is just, to uphold right order against its violation, to fulfill the function for which he was born and trained. As a kinsman, he has the dharma to honor the bonds of family and relationship, to protect rather than kill the people to whom those bonds connect him. As a student, he has the dharma of respect and gratitude toward his teachers, several of whom stand in the opposing army. These dharmas do not, in the situation he now faces, point in the same direction. The easy Western philosophical responses do not help. Consequentialism says calculate the outcomes and choose the course of action that produces the best consequences. But the consequences of the war, Arjuna can see this, will be catastrophic regardless of who wins. Deontology says act in accordance with the principle that could be universalized. But which principle, the warrior's duty to fight or the kinsman's duty not to kill his own people, both can be universalized. The conflict between them is not resolved by the formal structure of the principle. Virtue ethics says, what would the person of virtuous character do? But the virtuous character contains all of Arjuna's dharmas simultaneously. And the virtuous warrior is also the virtuous kinsman and the virtuous student. And the virtuous person is precisely the person who is paralyzed by the conflict between them. Krishna does not dissolve the conflict. He does something philosophically more interesting and more demanding. He reframes what action is, what the self is, and what the relationship between the self and its actions consists of, in a way that makes the performance of the dharmic obligation possible without the performance requiring the specific suffering that Arjuna anticipates. The reframing is not a trick. It is a philosophical teaching of genuine depth, and its depth is demonstrated by the fact that it requires the entire 18 chapters of the Gita to develop it fully. Nishkama karma. Action without attachment. The central practical teaching of the Bhagavad Gita, the teaching that is most immediately applicable to the question of how to act in a world of conflicting obligations and uncertain outcomes, is the teaching of Nishkama karma, desireless action, action without attachment to its fruits, action performed as duty rather than as the pursuit of a desired result. You have a right to perform your prescribed duties, Krishna tells Arjuna in one of the most quoted passages in the Gita. But you are not entitled to the fruits of your actions. Never consider yourself the cause of the results of your activities, and never be attached to not doing your duty. The teaching has been both celebrated as the highest wisdom and misread as a counsel of indifference. It is neither as simple as the celebration suggests, nor as cold as the misreading implies. What Krishna is distinguishing is not between caring and not caring about outcomes. The Gita's ethics is not an ethics of emotional anesthesia. He is distinguishing between two modes of action: the action performed in pursuit of a desired result, in which the actor's motivation is constitutively dependent on the outcome, and the action performed as the fulfillment of an obligation, in which the actor's motivation comes from the recognition of what is required rather than from the anticipation of what will be gained. The first mode of action, the action motivated by the desire for a specific outcome, is, in the Gita's analysis, the source of most human suffering, because outcomes are not fully within the actor's control, and the actor who has staked her emotional well-being on a specific outcome is the actor who suffers when the outcome does not arrive, or arrives in a different form, or arrives and then is lost. This is the Stoic insight, the reserve clause, the distinction between what is up to us and what is not, expressed in the Indic philosophical vocabulary. But the Gita goes further than the Stoics. The Stoics recommend the reserve clause as a practical strategy for reducing suffering in an uncertain world. The Gita grounds the recommendation in a metaphysical claim. The reason the actor should not be attached to the fruits of action is that the fruits of action are not, ultimately, hers to claim. The self that acts, in the deepest Upanishadic sense, is not the individual ego, but the Atman, the ultimate awareness that is the ground of all action. The individual ego does not act. The divine acts through the individual ego, as the rivers flow to the ocean without the ocean being affected by their flowing. This is the move that connects the Gita's practical ethics to its metaphysics. The person who has recognized the true nature of the self, who knows, not merely intellectually but directly, that the innermost self is the ultimate reality, acts without attachment because she knows that the actor and the action and the fruit of the action are all, at the deepest level, movements of the one reality. There is no separate self to be attached to outcomes because the self is not separate. The three paths, karma, jnana, bhakti. The Bhagavad Gita is, among other things, a synthesis, the attempt to hold together the major spiritual paths of the Indian tradition and to show how each, followed with sufficient depth, leads to the same realization. The path of karma yoga, the yoga of action, is the path that Arjuna's crisis has made necessary to articulate, and it is the path that most of the Gita's practical teaching develops. The warrior who fights without attachment to victory or defeat, who performs his duty without calculating what the duty will cost him or gain him, who acts from the recognition of obligation rather than from the desire for a specific outcome. This warrior is practicing karma yoga. He is in the world, fully engaged with the world's demands, and precisely because of his non-attachment to outcomes, he is free in a way that the person who acts from desire is not. The path of Jnana Yoga, the yoga of knowledge, is the path of the Upanishadic tradition, the direct recognition, through philosophical inquiry and contemplative practice, of the identity of the Atman with Brahman. Krishna teaches it in the second chapter of the Gita, in the philosophical heart of the text. The soul is never born, nor dies at any time. It has not come into being, does not come into being, and will not come into being. It is unborn, eternal, ever-existing, and primeval. The person who knows this, genuinely, not merely as a proposition, acts without fear of death and without attachment to life, because she knows that neither the death of the body nor the survival of it affects the Atman that is her deepest nature. The path of Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of devotion, is the path that the Gita introduces and that it ultimately presents as the highest and the most accessible. The person who loves Krishna, who surrenders to Krishna, who performs all her actions as offerings to Krishna, who sees Krishna in all beings and all beings in Krishna, this person achieves the liberation that Jnana Yoga achieves through philosophical knowledge and Karma Yoga achieves through non-attached action. She achieves it through love. The Bhakti teaching is philosophically the most radical element of the Gita, because it introduces a personal relationship between the individual soul and the ultimate reality that the impersonal Brahman of the Upanishads did not allow for. The Atman and Brahman are identical, this the Gita accepts, but the identity is not the dissolution of the individual into the impersonal absolute. It is the love of the individual for the personal God who is also the impersonal absolute, the relationship between the soul and its source that is simultaneously the recognition of their identity and the celebration of their distinction. The wave and the ocean are one, and the wave loves the ocean. The Cosmic Vision, Chapter 11. The 11th chapter of the Gita, the Vishvarupa chapter, the chapter of the Cosmic Vision, is the climax of the text and one of the most extraordinary passages in world literature. Arjuna has asked to see Krishna's true form, and Krishna grants him the divine sight to perceive it. What Arjuna sees is not describable in ordinary language, and the Gita's account of the vision acknowledges this from the beginning. It is an attempt to describe the indescribable, to translate into the sequential medium of human language an experience of the simultaneous, the infinite, the utterly beyond. Arjuna sees all the gods, all of creation, all of existence gathered into a single form that blazes with a light like 1,000 suns that contains all of time, past, present, and future, simultaneously, that shows him the warriors of both armies already dead, already destroyed, entering the mouths of the cosmic form that is consuming everything. I am time, the great destroyer of worlds, Krishna says, and I am here to destroy all people. The line which J. Robert Oppenheimer quoted when he watched the first atomic bomb test in 1945, and which has been associated with that moment of unprecedented destructive power ever since, is the Gita's most direct statement of the relationship between the ultimate reality and the processes of creation and destruction that constitute the manifest world. The ultimate reality is not only the source of creation, it is also the force of dissolution. It is the totality of what is, which includes both the arising and the passing away, both the birth and the death, both the construction and the destruction of every form that appears in the stream of existence. Arjuna is terrified. He asks Krishna to return to the human form, to the charioteer, the friend, the familiar presence that he can bear to be near. And Krishna does. The human form is available again, the face of the friend who has been sitting beside him in the chariot, and behind that face, not hidden but present, the infinite. The vision, and the return from the vision, is the Gita's most compressed statement of its central teaching. The ultimate reality is present in the ordinary. The infinite is present in the finite. The cosmic is present in the personal, and the relationship between the two is not a relationship of opposition or distance, but of identity within difference. You can sit next to the infinite in a chariot. The infinite will ask you why you have put down your bow. Action in the world. The Gita and ordinary life. The Bhagavad Gita was written, as nearly as its historical context can be reconstructed, for people who are fully engaged with the world, warriors, householders, kings, administrators, people whose lives were constituted by action and its consequences, by obligation and its fulfillment, by the specific demands of specific roles in a specific social order. It is not a text for the renunciant who has withdrawn from the world. It is a text for the person who is in the world and who needs to know how to be in it rightly. This is the feature that makes the Gita the most practically accessible of the Indian philosophical texts we have considered in this series, and the one that has resonated most widely across cultures and across centuries. Mahatma Gandhi read the Gita every day of his adult life and described it as his mother, the text to which he turned for guidance in the specific, agonizing daily practical problem of how to act rightly in a world of injustice and conflicting obligations. The nonviolent resistance that Gandhi developed as a political strategy is, in his own account, an application of the Gita's teaching of Nishkama karma, action performed as duty without attachment to outcome, and the recognition that the actor cannot ultimately control the fruits of action, and that the quality of the action is the actor's responsibility and the outcome is not. The Gita's teaching of non-attachment has been both celebrated and misread in the contemporary world. Celebrated by the mindfulness movement and the various secular spiritualities that draw on it. Misread as a teaching of disengagement, of detachment from the suffering of others, of the spiritual bypass that uses the language of non-attachment to justify inaction in the face of injustice. The Gita itself does not support this reading. Arjuna's dharma is to fight, to engage fully, to perform the action that his nature and his role require. The non-attachment is not to the action but to the fruits of the action. Krishna does not tell Arjuna to put down his bow and meditate. He tells him to pick it up and to fight without the grasping, the fear, the desperate clinging to outcomes that turns the performance of duty into the source of suffering. This is the specific challenge that the Gita sets for the person who encounters it. Not, are you at peace? Not, have you withdrawn from the world? But are you performing your duty fully and without reservation, and doing so without the attachment to outcomes that makes the performance a form of suffering? Can you act with your whole heart, giving everything the action requires, and then release the outcome to whatever it will be? Can you fight without hatred, love without possession, build without the terror of losing what you have built? Who we are, according to the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita's answer to the question of who we are is a synthesis, the most ambitious synthesis in the Indian philosophical tradition, of the impersonal and the personal, the absolute and the relational, the metaphysical and the practical. We are the Atman, the eternal, unborn, undying consciousness that is the ground of all experience, that is not created when the body is born and not destroyed when the body dies. That is the deepest truth of what we are beneath all the identifications with role and relationship and personality that constitute the surface of ordinary life. In this, the Gita is continuous with the Upanishadic tradition. We are also actors, beings constituted by obligation and role and relationship, thrown into specific situations that make specific demands, required to act in response to those demands with the full engagement of our capacities, performing the dharma that our nature and our situation require. The self that is the it-man is the self that acts in the world, not despite being the at-man, but as the it-man, as the expression and specific form of the consciousness that is the ground of all form. We are, most fully, the beings who love. The Gita's ultimate teaching, the teaching that Krishna describes as the highest, the most secret, the most directly transformative, is the teaching of bhakti, of the love of the individual soul for the ultimate reality that is also the ground of the individual soul, the relationship between the wave and the ocean that is simultaneously identity and love, union and devotion, the recognition that the deepest truth about the self is not the cold equation of Atman and Brahman, but the warm, living, direct relationship of the soul with its source. The warrior in the chariot, the bow on the ground beside him, the god turning to him and asking why he has stopped. The answer that the god gives, the long 18-chapter, universe-containing answer, is the answer that includes everything, the metaphysics of the eternal self, the ethics of non-attached action, the devotion of the personal love, the cosmic vision that shows everything destroyed and everything sustained by the same force, the return to the human face, the picking up of the bow. Fight, says Krishna. Fight knowing what you are, knowing what the fight is for, knowing that the fruits are not yours to claim and the self that fights is not the self that can be harmed. Fight with love. Fight as duty. Fight as worship. Arjuna picks up his bow